So welcome to the Future of Wellbeing podcast. I'm your host, Rob Stevenson, and I'm here, delighted to be here, in fact, with Tim Munden, founder of Chiron, and we're going to hear all about that in a second. Previously Chief Learning Officer of Unilever. Tim, welcome.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's really lovely to be with you.
Great to have you. Great to have you. And so we're going to start with just kind of asking you how you are today. As you can see in my background, a little bit of low form, my form score being a 5 out of 10. And as we were just saying before we went live, can't really put a picture on the why. Part of my experience of being human, practicing acceptance, trying to be in the moment to deal with it. Pleased to say that I think I'm coming out of the lowest point of it and on the up curve. So good to be with you today when I'm feeling low, I can tell you that. But how about you? What's your form score today, and what kind of work and personal factors are affecting it?
Well, thank you, and thank you for sharing yours, Rob. I know people find that really inspiring that you consistently live that practice. I think I'm probably at a 7.
Good.
Not quite at peak, but by no means kind of struggling. I think what's driving it, what's pulling it up, is a sense of opportunity. I find it endlessly energizing what's possible. And in fact, even as I talk about it, I can feel my kind of spirit lift. I think what's pulling it down is I've been struggling with some basics. So I'm just starting to get back into the gym again. And I need to build that habit. I'm feeling a bit intimidated, I think, by needing to really get that fundamental in place. And I've also been struggling a bit with, which is unusual for me, my meditation habit, which is generally really good and been a lifelong friend. But I've found so much going on that I've almost found that fundamental hard to connect with. So that's what's pulling me down a bit. So the fundamentals need work, but there's a lot of excitement about possibility.
I love that concept of possibility. Are you an optimist? We both work in kind of change and kind of leadership and well-being, but I think you need to have a bit of optimism and to be excited by the possibility. But are you an optimist?
I think I am. So I describe my purpose as to nurture deeply human possibility.
Yeah.
And I can't help but be optimistic when you work with human beings, because if you listen to the news, you do get nothing but a gloomy sense of what human beings are capable collectively of doing. But actually, when I work with people, yesterday, in the last few days, I've been running a purpose workshop with an organization, and you just hear people's purpose, people's creativity, their energy, the richness of their experience, how they process struggle even, and I find it's just endlessly uplifting. There's something about human beings which I think is magical, and I can't help but have hope. And so I must be an optimist, I guess.
Nurturing human possibility. I mean, what a wonderful purpose to have. And I can see you light up when you talk about it. As you say, your spirit lifted. It's interesting about the news, isn't it? And social news and Twitter and these places where people get their information. Why do you think it is so negative? Why are we displaying the negative side of humanity?
Well, we could be here for hours on that. In short, I think it's because, and this is a real simplification, we lose our sense of oneness. And the fact that to have well-being, ultimately, we have well-being in connection with others, in society, in the system. We live in harmony with nature. And when we lose connection from nature, from society, from community, from all these things that give us a sense of oneness, I think our well-being suffers. And so let me give you a couple of examples of that. What I think is happening in part in social media is young people, particularly, by no means exclusively, are drawing comparison continually, themselves against others. Am I living my best life compared to someone else? And I think it's a really damaging thing to constantly compare yourself to others. And it's not just, I mean, sometimes you come out worse, sometimes you come out better, but it's a constant exercise in separation. And I think that's an example of how the more separate we feel, the less in community and in the whole, the more we suffer. And I think we see it also in and don't want to get too political, but I think we see a little bit in economics and politics. We think, my gang is I've got to make sure my gang's okay, and it doesn't matter so much about other gangs, however you define them. But actually, we all live in the same system, and I don't think any of us can ultimately have well-being until we all do to a certain degree.
Oneness. We're losing our sense of oneness. I think that's right. So yesterday I posted that I was depressed, and I don't always do that now, but as you know, as a campaigner, I'm very open, and I posted kind of what I do when I'm depressed and what my friend had done for me, which was some simple things: checking in, sending me some songs, booking some concert tickets, wonderful stuff. Asked me if I wanted to speak to him. I didn't. He accepted that. But I posted all of this, and what I found was actually I got that sense of oneness and connection from my network out on LinkedIn social. And it was, a number of people that know me obviously reached out and said, offered support, but a whole bunch of people that don't know me did the same. And I found this wonderfully inspiring, and part of the reason I think I'm lifted a bit today, because I felt really connected to humanity via this digital platform. So it's not all bad, is it? It can be good if we kind of allow it to be. And I guess, what am I saying with this? It would be wonderful if there was more examples of that kind of use of digital to connect than the polarizing negative stuff that we've just been talking about.
Yeah, and so social media platforms are responding. So my kids, they're in their early 20s, but they're using Be Real rather than some of the other platforms, because it encourages that sense of you as you are right now, right here. What's happening around you? And that becomes very, I think, intriguing, because and connecting. What's my friend doing right now? Rather than the constant comparison thing. So I think the world is responding again. There is something about human beings. We're deeply creative, and we will find new ways through.
100%. So we've known each other for a while. You were kindly a member of the first Inside Out leaderboard that celebrates and showcases role models at a senior leadership level who are open about the fact they are managing a mental health challenge and have a mental health challenge. Amongst many roles at Unilever, you were also head of well-being. Talk us through a little bit about your passion for well-being and why that role was so important to you.
Yes, I think my passion for well-being comes from a couple of places. One is my purpose of nurturing possibility. For human beings to be happy, contented, fulfilled, we need to have well-being. And I think having well-being is part of how we unlock the possibility of human beings. And if we can unlock the possibility of human beings, we will solve climate change, we'll solve inequality. The solution lies in us. It's not out there, it's in us. And for me, part of unlocking well-being is trying to get some of that energy and insight and all of that. I think the mental health component of it is about the alleviation of suffering, in part. And I think I've seen, before I realized that I had post-traumatic stress and that's what was happening in me. I know lots of my family had struggled, and I have friends who'd struggled. And then actually gradually realizing that almost everybody, I often, as you probably do, you're doing a speaking gig and you ask people to put up their hand if they have, or someone they know has struggled with them, and like every hand goes up. And yet we still behave as if this is a kind of minority shameful thing that we don't need to talk about, which is why I think the work you do is so impactful, because you're constantly bringing an honesty that this is the human condition. And so I think for me it's partly about people I know and love, and then actually for me it was a bit upside down. I got into well-being first, and then through that journey, realized that what I was experiencing had a name. And then I could get treatment and support. And that's been a great journey to get to go to work on myself. So I think that's where it comes from. It's, again, helping human possibility and trying to remove suffering.
And you came up through kind of HR and learning, and well-being being for you a natural extension of that. And clearly, I think with well-being there is a huge learning component. Was that a kind of natural fit? Did that kind of make sense in the Unilever world to combine the two?
It did. It made perfect sense. And during COVID, it made incredible sense. But I think it's also a little bit my perspective on well-being and where we're going. I think the future of organizational well-being is integration. Well-being integrated into how we develop leaders, how we arrange teams, how we design organizations. All of it should be informed by well-being. And my worry at the moment is actually well-being is consigned to a niche, often aligned to kind of medical, occupational health. That's not a bad thing. I mean, those teams are phenomenal, fantastic, necessary partners in the well-being coalition. But we need well-being to live in the whole. And I'm not sure we're quite there yet. So for me, being able to support leaders, teams, culture, and have well-being as part of that absolutely makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I'm super keen to jump into your future of well-being views, as that's the theme of this podcast. Before we do that, I definitely agree with you that there are many different professionals that I see in workplaces that have grabbed well-being. You know, sometimes it's occupational health, sometimes it's health and safety, sometimes it's kind of HR. I've seen some benefits professionals do a brilliant job because that's the natural starting point for many organizations, not necessarily the correct one, but you know, and there's some wonderful people doing this, but as you say, they're operating in silos of their main function, with well-being bolted on, whereas well-being, I think, needs its kind of own space that goes across everything. Would you agree?
Absolutely. So I think we've seen this film before. So people who've grown up in factories and manufacturing environments, total productive maintenance and those kinds of lean manufacturing systems. For a while, you get this kind of group of experts who kind of hold the knowledge, but in the end, that only works when it's applied to the whole system, and you end up with this tension of, you know, is it done by a few or does it need to be in everywhere? And I think in the end, what happens is organizations go, actually, we have to have this embedded everywhere, and I think that's a natural journey to go through. But we've got to get to well-being embedded everywhere. How do we design cultures that are high performing, that also, and I don't think there's any conflict here, nurture well-being? Now, what is the organizational design that optimizes performance and well-being? And I think we're getting more and more kind of data on what those things are.
Yeah, and I would argue not only is there no conflict, well-being, as we know, is an essential component of achieving that high performance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we know that individually. The data coming out, so the BT study on call centers was an interesting one, that call centers, you can really measure performance, and if you decide to measure well-being, you can then work out, is there a causality? And it looks like there is. You know, those with higher well-being perform better based on sales calls, retention of customers, and all sorts of metrics that you can measure easily in call centers. So to achieve performance, we need well-being. But I think well-being is often seen as very separate to performance. And in a lot of organizations, it's seen as something to offer people as a bit of a discretionary benefit, or let's look at well-being when we need to fix people.
And that's going to run out of steam very, very fast. Because in the end, people are not going to want to work in organizations that are toxic to your well-being, but offer you some support just in case the toxicity gets to you. That's not going to work. And to be clear, what I'm not saying is that work is never going to be stressful. a certain amount of stress is good for us. In fact, necessary. As we go back to the 1908 Yerkes-Dodson curve, still a great piece of work. We need a certain amount of arousal, some stimulus. And for myself, I do a lot of work running webinars and public speaking, and a certain amount of, kind of tension is really good to get you up and perform well. Now, it's got to be kind of the optimal level. So we need that. But what we need to understand is how to get that optimal level and how to deal with kind of with peak demands of peak demands that are very demanding of people. How do we give people the resilience for that? And of course, how do we support people when their well-being drops? But it is absolutely about well-being is a core part of high performance.
Yeah, I love the Yerkes-Dodson curve. The best name for a curve ever, the Yerkes-Dodson arousal curve. And I do talk about that in my keynotes too, because you're right. If we don't have any stress or perceived pressure, we're pretty flat in our performance. So there is that optimal amount. The problem is if you never recover from that and you try to stay there all of the time, then you will reach overload, exhaustion, and ultimately that's where burnout comes from, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And burnout comes from, this is where we get to some of the really interesting stuff. I've worked with a psychiatrist who deals with kind of senior leaders, and he talks about the shame-perfection-burnout cycle. So people come in with a sense of I'm not good enough, a sense of shame. It's one of the most difficult human emotions, very common human emotion.
Yeah.
Then you think, well, I've got to overcome that sense. You go for perfection, and then you inevitably burn out. I think the other implication of our conversation, well-being embedded in everything we do, is we need to start to support people with that kind of cycle. So I think certainly in the work I do with senior leaders, more and more we're getting into conversations about what are those underlying emotions that are impacting them, that are driving them into some of these behaviors, that are not supporting their long-term performance, and are certainly not supporting their impact on the wider organization. Perfectionist leaders can be very, very toxic to work for. So I think part of what's happening where well-being, performance, and leadership merge is an increased focus on the deep inner game, and starting to use techniques to help shift some of the things that are holding people back, because that in turn really helps the whole organization.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think, we know that when leaders speak out about their mental health challenges, that creates a culture that people have more permission and feel safer in seeking help and being open about challenges they experience personally. But I think it's really fascinating where it's moving to, that actually to truly have a well-being focus in the organization, we need to kind of unlock some of the behaviors of leaders in terms of how they're operating personally to help them, and then their behaviors can kind of filter out through the organization, can't they?
Absolutely. So the inner game, as we call it, drives the outer game.
Yeah.
The habits, attitudes, practices, beliefs you have within yourself is what drives your behavior. So if you have a sense that human beings only really work well when you put them under high pressure, if that's your attitude, then that's what you're going to treat yourself like, and that's what you're going to do to the people around you, and that's the culture you're going to create. So I think what we're doing in certainly in leadership development is more and more we're getting into deep transformational interventions to try and help shift some of those attitudes.
Hence learning, right? Hence the link with learning that we started talking about, because I guess the perception for a lot of leaders that have come through is you do need to put yourself under pressure. You do need to push yourself hard, that old school way of thinking. And so how easy or difficult it is to change that mindset?
Well, I think we're getting more and more data. So let's take purpose as an example. Having a sense of individual purpose. The research that Unilever has done with the LSE has shown that people who have a clear sense of purpose are much more willing to go the extra mile, are much more satisfied in their jobs, are much more satisfied in their lives. And this was a one-day workshop that Unilever were using, that 56,000 people completed in the organization. So we can see that it has a benefit to motivation, it has a benefit to productivity, and there's wider data on that as well. We know people who bring a strong sense of individual purpose have health benefits, productivity, performance, engagement. So purpose is a real deep inner thing, but it has real benefits. Their relationship, in fact, their sense of connection to team, to organization improve.
Yeah.
So why am I talking about purpose? It's a deep part of the inner game that has a massive impact on people's well-being and on their performance and on their engagement at work. And so if we can create organizations that encourage people to bring a sense of purpose and give them the space to explore their purpose and express their purpose at work, we'll create workplaces that are higher performing and that are better for people. There's no trade-off here between well-being and performance. If you pull the right inner levers, if you forgive the expression, if you access the right inner energies, there is no trade-off.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I often use Unilever as an example. When we talk about the journey with stuff like this, well-being particularly, and our friend Jeff McDonald used to talk about us being in the foothills, where you've still got Everest to climb. I think the Unilevers of this world, and there are a few maybe, have got to base camp. When there's still a mountain to climb, but there's a lot of progress to get to base camp. And I think there's a bunch of organizations trekking through the foothills, and I think there's some that are deciding whether or not to start. And that's kind of a nice visualization as to where I see we're at. To get beyond base camp and to get to base camp, I think there's this reconciliation that the purpose of a corporation can't just be about profit and can't just be about shareholder value. There's got to be other things that might contribute to that need to be important. What is it about Unilever and the culture and the leadership and your impact? What is it about that organization that allowed that enlightened thinking to happen?
I think there are several things. So one is its history. It was founded, one of the founding companies by Lord Leverhulme back in the 1880s, was purposeful. He had a vision that work should be good for people, hence why he built the village at Port Sunlight. He took that vision more broad into society. He put the first bill in front of Parliament for a pension scheme in the United Kingdom. So he had a vision of work being good for people, and that society should take care of everyone in it and give opportunity, which I think is really powerful, and such a powerful founding purpose and vision kind of stays, and it's been nurtured by the people who've come afterwards. I think then Paul Polman, when he became CEO, really taking that, building on work being done by previous leaders to create this purpose of making sustainable living commonplace. It's a very, very profound purpose. It's well expressed purpose, because in there if you want to make sustainable living commonplace, well, that includes the well-being of human beings as well as the environment in which we are. So I think that sense of purposefulness has really massively helped, and the values that have come through. And I think what's happening is the business, and it's not uncomplicated. Becoming a purpose-driven business is not uncomplicated, but I think there's a commitment to seeing that these things are not in opposition. And that, I think, is the key. I would say, to your point, Rob, that business is about more than just profit. Even if business is just about profit, you still need to invest in well-being, or you're not going to get the profit.
For sure,
even if it's just about the financials, investing in high performance and helping people when they struggle to recover and come back to high performance is a massively good business case.
Yeah, and we've, again, emerging data, I think, will fuel this, because we've seen the data from Jan-Emmanuel Deneuve around the Indeed study with 15 million data points of people ranking their employers on well-being. They've correlated that to stock market performance in the US, and that significantly outperforms the market, those companies that are doing the best at well-being. The Business in the Community report that came out this week have quantified the opportunity of investing proactively in creating cultures that are conducive to well-being. the numbers range from £4,000 to £12,000 per employee in terms of the gain. It's huge, right? If you just look at the business case numbers.
It's massive, but but we shouldn't be surprised. It's great that we're building that business case, but it should be no surprise. If we want human beings to work at high levels of performance, which we do, and more we need to, as society shifts to the kinds of work that we need doing, this becomes even more pronounced. But if we want human beings to perform highly, we have to treat them as human beings, unsurprisingly. And that includes investing in all the things that human beings need. For me, it's completely logical. And we're now getting more and more data to quantify it, which I think will also help us to know where to make some of the investments.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's the role of data, isn't it? To point to areas within an organization that require work to create this culture conducive to well-being.
So one of the things, just to give you an example, one of the things I think is emerging very clearly in data, we've had it all for a while in practice and in theory, is the need for human beings to have autonomy. People have higher well-being when at work, when they have a greater sense of autonomy. But actually, work is going that way anyway. High performance is starting to take us to the point where we need to see people have autonomy. If you want to run an innovative business, and you want to be fast in bringing innovations to market, you move responsibility as close to the people looking after the customer as possible. You give them autonomy. And so I think what we're seeing in the latest kind of wave of organizational change, again, is an opportunity to really target exactly what helps human beings have well-being, and to see that that is also what helps us to serve, as organizations, other human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you look at the drivers of well-being, autonomy is frequently tagged, certainly in FormScore data and other data sources, as something that's really important to people. So let's look at that kind of vision of the future of well-being for you. You've alluded to it, you've touched on it, but expand on it for me. You know, what does the world of well-being look like in the workplace in the future, Tim?
So I think, as we talked about, it looks like well-being is hardwired into every discipline of how we manage an organization. So I've talked about leadership development, helping leaders to have well-being themselves so that their leadership helps to nurture the well-being of people around them, dealing with underlying attitudes that get in the way. And therefore, I think we're going to get into deeper and deeper interventions with people, support for people in order to do that. Embedding well-being in culture, for example. So I think some organizations are starting that, such as, embedding purpose at scale. That will become a standard, I think, because it has such massive well-being benefits, engagement, retention, everything organizations want. I think purpose is a great example. It's human beings need meaning in their lives or they struggle. We've known that from Viktor Frankl onwards, and probably for thousands of years before. What we're now getting to is that purpose is being understood as an organizational psychology kind of component, well researched, and I think it will become core to how we manage culture, alongside autonomy and those kinds of things. Well-being will be embedded there. It will be embedded in organization design. The implication of this is that well-being will no longer be the preserve of a profession, any more than quality can be the preserve of one group. If you want to run an operation that has high quality, you embed quality all the way through your operation. And you may have quality professionals who can help to do that, but quality's got to be embedded throughout the whole thing. I think we're going to go the same place with well-being. Well-being embedded in every stage. But what that means is that the well-being professionals have two challenges ahead. First of all, they have to be integrators, networkers, able to talk to everybody in the organizational system about how to bring well-being to the fore. So we have to elevate well-being to include, of course, the medical, but to also build on that the whole human perspective of high performance as well. And that, I think, is the future of the well-being profession, is what do human beings need when they struggle, but also to achieve the peak of performance, and then to be able to work with HR, with finance, with all of the different key actors in an organization to embed well-being in each part of it. That knowledge, that integrator role. And so I think I see well-being starting to be the conveners and the conscience and the facilitators of the well-being embedded in the system.
Really interesting, which will require a skill set acquisition for those well-being professionals that have been very much focused on solutions and benefits, which again, that's evolution, isn't it? I'm thinking about kind of then the importance of measuring well-being and sort of that well-being measurement being, I guess, the North Star or a North Star measurement for an organization. Because what we're talking about here, if we can successfully integrate well-being, like the example of quality across different functions, cascading through an organization, clearly, if we've got a reliable measure of well-being that is important to how managers are assessed, and this is actually used, then we've got that kind of North Star to aim at. What's your kind of view on the importance of measuring well-being?
I think it's fundamental. I think it's fundamental, but I think the measurement of well-being to make the business case for doing it is that's base camp.
Yeah.
We now need to I think deepen, and we're getting it. I mean, there's lots of data out there, but maybe what we haven't quite done yet is to organize it into a coherent kind of framework. But I think we need to now measure well-being in a way that helps us to understand the particular drivers for people and the impact of different interventions. And we're starting. What exactly is the impact of autonomy? What do we mean by autonomy? And actually, of course, autonomy is a bit like a Yerkes-Dodson curve. Too much autonomy, exposed and alone. Not enough, unempowered and lacking space to express. So I think trying to understand how do we get to the optimal point of autonomy. So I think that's where we're going is trying to understand that, but also trying to.
There's probably some. Sorry to interrupt you. There's probably some nice experiments you could do there, isn't there? In kind of A/B testing with split testing with levels of autonomy, and then looking at well-being as the outcome measure to see which are optimal.
Totally, absolutely, and I mean there are studies I think published on autonomy, but we need more, I think, and particularly from this angle of what helps people to kind of be able to bring all the energy and creativity that they have. So I think data is going to really help us. The challenge for organizations, of course, is people's willingness to share their data. We have to do a massive exercise in trust building. Because already there is far more data available than organizations are using because of it's a lot of the data is personalized. Now, I think in a lot of conversations about the future of well-being, someone will say it's about personalization, and I think that's true. But there's a massive hurdle for organizations to get over, which is individuals consenting to have that depth of data shared. And I'm not sure many organizations, even ones that have a really positive environment, are really in a place where people are going to be willing to share all the possible data.
I think you're right. I was engaging in an online conversation on this very point, and I think there's been studies shown about the reluctance of people to share their wellbeing data. At FormScore, we certainly have seen this in our first product, which was very much an individual product aggregated up. You'll get a bunch of people that are happy to, but you'll get a bunch of people that are not going to. And that will range depending on psychological safety of the organization. But there's still a fundamental barrier there. So we built our latest product that we don't collect any personal data from employees, just the data of the manager, and then we tag people to the manager, which I think is a good workaround. But then that also means we're not collecting the same amount of demographic data that you might do if you were, collecting the individual data. So there's a trade-off there as to what's acceptable and what's useful.
Yes, and I guess the opportunity, and I suspect this is where we'll end up going, is specific research studies which get consent and which individuals go, oh, that's going to be interesting, I'm going to get good data, I'm going to consent for this study, rather than consent at scale to share it. Because FormScore could do if you can, for a particular study, get that demographic data, you can then
Yes.
deepen your insights, and use that to innovate new products, share best practices without it becoming a standard feature.
Yeah, I think that's a sensible balance. And I think there's another point you've touched on there. There's actually, what are you giving back to the individuals? What are you giving back to employees? I mean, the engagement survey is a classic one, isn't it? You ask people to fill in this survey. The leadership and management get the data, but what do you give back to employees? They may get access to it, but actually what is useful that you're giving back to the employees about what they've recorded? And I think there's a duty for those that are collecting data to actually make it useful for the individuals that are giving the data.
That's true, to make it useful. And one of the things that the wellbeing team at Unilever created with an external partner was a team energy survey, which we deployed during COVID, massively helpful. So everyone in the team fills in a wellbeing survey. The manager gets an anonymized summary, as long as there's enough people in the team who've completed it. And the manager then gets something that they can share with the team and facilitate a conversation. But each individual has an individual report saying, here's where you are on the pressure performance curve. Here's some things you might want to think about. So there's a win-win. In fact, there's a triple win. The manager gets insight about their leadership. The individual gets data about their well-being, and the team get a conversation they can have. And I think it's a good example of how you create wins for everybody in the situation by using data.
Yeah, and again, if you can facilitate that team conversation, I think that's where you can affect relevant change, because each team will differ in terms of what's going on, right?
But I think coming back to the future of well-being, I think there's two themes we've just touched on. One is tools, embedding things in tools that users can just use. Because the minute you need an external facilitator, you've increased the cost hurdle. And I think it's better off, as long as the tools are well designed, well supported, you're better off putting the tool in the hand of the manager and saying, just play with that. The second, and I think that's going to be a trend, because organizations have limited budgets, and yet we need to drive change at scale. Second trend, I think, is champions and advocates in the community. So one of the big learnings I took out of my time as Chief Learning Officer and Head of Wellbeing at Unilever was the power of training people. Mindfulness champions, well-being champions. You could run a well-being workshop. Purpose champions. You can run the well-being, and actually people are looking for that. People want that kind of enrichment and opportunity, and there's something really powerful about people in the community supporting each other. So I think that's a trend that I think we saw it. We experimented a lot in Unilever. I'm hearing it in lots of other organizations too now. And it's a great way of driving change.
I think you're right. And I think the role of the champion, whatever discipline that champion is really important if they're properly trained and they're properly supported, rather than just, we'll recruit a few of these so we've ticked the wellbeing box, which is the other end of the scale.
Totally. They've got to be well trained and well supported.
Yeah. I want to talk about managers for a second, and I've heard you talk about this before, and I think it's very relevant to this discussion, is the responsibilities and what we're asking of managers. We're asking a lot of the line manager, right? And well-being being a core component, but talk me through your views on that. Are we asking too much of managers?
Well, I think that the 21st century organization is a complex place. And it's complex because, quite rightly, I'm not saying any of this is wrong, and it's quite right. Organizations are very focused on their external impacts on society, be that environmental and social. They're very conscious of within the walls of the company, making sure they're good citizens, on inclusion and diversity, and on safety and on well-being. And all of that, the features of the 21st century, in the end, come down to line managers, or a lot of it does. And so we are asking a lot. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I am saying is that we're often not coming in an organized and coherent way to the line manager. So often in organizations, different people come to line managers asking them to do different things. And coming back to our conversation about integration, I think the organizations that will really help line managers to thrive and be impactful, and therefore help the organizations to become really great 21st century organizations, are the ones that come to line managers and say, here are your responsibilities. Here's all the things we're asking of you. Here's the tools. Here's the metrics. We've integrated some of this stuff together. So, for example, we should be integrating together conversations about hybrid and how teams do hybrid. We should be sharing that. We should be integrating that with team charters and team habits and practice, team effect. It's all the same thing. So let's not come to them with different things, but integrate stuff together so it's easy to use. That means that everyone who's impacting line managers has to get together and take responsibility for presenting them with a coherent framework, not 1,000 initiatives, because that's what sinks line managers.
Yeah. And again, linking what you were saying before, well-being being the cohesion between different parts of the organization, that's a good lens to look at this, isn't it? Kind of all of these responsibility of managers, how is that affecting the well-being of the manager and therefore the team?
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting, really interesting stuff. One other question on future of well-being. I like the vision you've laid out. What do you think needs to happen for us to realize this vision?
So a few things. I think that step one is we need to elevate and educate well-being professionals to being the strategic integrators of well-being. And so how do we create the influencing skills for the well-being professional to engage on org culture, org design, and some of those things? There's some of the internal process designs. So integrator, strategist, influencer, I think there's some skills in there we need to build. And I think that the well-being professional community will love that. Because I think I sometimes feel there's a sense of powerlessness and working within a niche and wishing they could have more impact outside the niche. We need to help that to happen. Step one. Step two, I think we need to see well-being integrated in all the disciplines of organizational kind of design and leadership. That will take longer because you can't just pull a button and do that. But I think we will see it, and we probably need someone, Rob, to write a book on what that looks like.
Yes, indeed.
And how that actually shows up. Well-being is part of the bloodstream of the whole, not a particular limb.
Yeah, I agree. Better get writing.
Yeah.
It's a really good vision, and I think, again, if we can have well-being as that North Star and inspire leaders as to why that North Star is a good idea, then it starts to flow, and it will take time. This isn't just a quick fix solution. This is a project of years for an organization, isn't it? I guess I think
it does, but you can get wins along the way. To come back to Unilever's one-day kind of purpose workshop that leads to an increase in job satisfaction and life satisfaction, high 20s, early 30%. That gets to kind of people being, willing to go the extra mile by, 20, 30%. That's it's not that hard. Yeah. And part of the reason for me setting up Chiron was wanting to go and take some of this work, some of this thinking, and evolve new things. And there's appetite, and it doesn't actually take a lot to get these things moving in organizations.
Yeah, if we decide to do so. Very, very good. Well, we'll put a link to your website so people can contact you if they need some help on this. I'm going to talk music for a second. I asked you to select a song that is a kind of mood booster for you. How important is music in your life, Tim?
I listen to a lot of music. I love music. I listen to a huge range of music, from classical to everything. So and it's important. I use it to boost my mood. I use it to energize. I just enjoy the intricacy of music. It's interesting, isn't it? I think it's such a human thing. To create music. It's just it's joyful, but because it's joyful or moving, but because of that, it has an effect on us and helps us. So I think it's a beautiful thing. Yeah,
amazing. So I'm just going to play a little extract from your track, which is Friday I'm in Love by The Cure, which is a great song. So we'll play a little bit now. So I love, I mean, I love that opening guitar riff. It's amazing. But
Yeah,
it's kind of like a hopeful song, isn't it? Monday I'm feeling blue, but then you go through the week and this hope that Friday you're feeling positive and in love, right? That's what I get
yeah,
from that.
yeah. I do too. And part of the reason I love that song is partly that energetic kind of, let's say, the guitar riff, and I just think, I don't know, I'm in love is just such a wonderful. I just kind of just, I don't know, expression of joyfulness. But also, I have a very happy memory of actually going to see The Cure
Yeah.
a few years ago in London, in Hyde Park, with my daughter and some of my nieces and some of my daughter's friends, and it was just a great experience. One, you have those experiences sometimes that you're having a wonderful time,
Yeah.
and to treasure it. And my daughter and I have a shared playlist, and we basically put on it music we're currently listening to.
Brilliant.
And this is one of the tracks on that playlist, and I find that gives me a lot of joy.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and I think music is a great connector, right? And as you know, I've been working on this concept of I'm calling it harmonizing the mind, where I smash together public speaking and DJing with a kind of mental health music performance. But the thinking behind it is actually we can attract a different audience to come and have a look
Yeah,
at this because people are interested in music, and not everybody yet is interested in their mental health and well-being. Um, but music, 90% of us regularly listen to music, so it can bring us together, can't it?
yeah, definitely, definitely, and across generations.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. My daughter is like she's really into Eminem, which is really surprised me because he's like an old school rapper, and she knows all the words partly because she can just rap out the expletives, I'm sure. But it was very surprising to learn that my 11 soon to be 12-year-old daughter is an Eminem fan from back in the day. So yeah,
It is amazing what pops up on the playlist.
yeah,
I love that. So I'm just looking at the playlist now, and what pops up on there. And one of my favorite moments was when my daughter said she put a couple of James Brown tracks on,
amazing.
and said, "Oh, I found this. Have you heard James Brown?" It's like, yeah,
Brilliant. It's like discovery, isn't it? It's discovery. It's really
yeah.
exciting. But I think that's a great tip. I'm gonna do that with my kids, and enjoy their musical journey over the next few years. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to do a bit of a quick fire round. This is nothing I've asked you to prepare for. It's all around kind of if the future of well-being were a something, what would it be? So if the future of well-being were a color, what would it be for you, Tim?
Green,
Why green?
um, nature, a natural ecosystem. So I think, yeah, well-being will be seen as part of our natural ecosystem.
Very good. Yeah, and I'm pleased to say my form has just boosted to the green of the 6 out of 10, partly for your song choice, partly for this wonderful conversation. So we're feeling green right now. If the future of well-being were a food, what would it be?
Wow.
That's a tough one. That's the toughest one I'm going to give you.
Um, if it was a food, what would it be? I think it would be one of those foods that can grow anywhere. One of those nutritious things that kind of
Yeah.
naturally springs up anywhere. In fact, so I'm going to slightly cheat. You can technically eat it. The silver birch tree.
Right.
When a piece of land starts to recover, so let's say it's
Yeah.
been bulldozed or the trees cut down. Certainly in kind of our part of Europe, the first tree that will pop back is the silver birch tree. Very resilient, very quick to spread, and actually you can drink the sap
Yeah.
of a silver birch tree. So I think well-being is kind of like the silver birch, resilient, quick to recover when you create the conditions.
Yeah, I love that resilience, but that recovery, and obviously very nutritious. I like it. I like it. If the future of well-being were a place in the world, what would it be for you? Where would it be for you?
Oh wow. So I'm going to go personal with this one. I would say probably Florence
Yeah,
in Italy, which is just one of my favorite places for all kinds of reasons. Very happy memories, beautiful art, but also the wisdom of some of those the city kind of founders.
yeah,
So for all that I know, kind of Medici and their wealth is easy to criticize, and for good reason. the wisdom that Cosimo de Medici had in and how he used that wealth to create well-being in the city, the design of institutions, the investment in learning. I thought, for the time and place of its time and place, a lot of wisdom and a Renaissance perspective of the whole human in the system in which they live.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I think that's the second time you've gone back, to founder of Unilever, founders of an ancient city. We probably can learn a lot from the past, and hopefully we're in for a renaissance of our thinking as to how we create human sustainability. Last one. This one's an important one. So you're warmed up now. If the future of well-being were an animal, Tim, what would it be for you?
Wow, an animal. If the future of well-being was an animal, I would say it's probably like our kind of little garden robins here in Northern Europe.
Yeah.
They're my great friends. I love my garden. When I'm looking out the window, I'm looking at it now. It gives me inspiration. And what I love about the little robins, they come and sit next to me when I'm gardening.
Yeah.
And they kind of look at me like, when's my turn to have a go at this earth? You turn it over and I eat the worms. And they literally, once one actually landed on my back when I was on my hands and knees weeding. And that kind of integration, they know they're part of the system. They're looking at me going kind of like, you're really helpful digging this over, and I now want to get to my food. So I think well-being is a sweet part of the system.
I love it. That's such a great example. And that symbiosis, that connection, that shared responsibility. I'm getting a lot of that. Brilliant. Thank you for those. You are now the future of well-being, Robin. Julie christened here. This has been such a good conversation. Just a couple more things to cover. What would be your top tip for professionals in the wellbeing space who are looking to improve workplace wellbeing and reach that future?
Reach out, make alliances. And whichever way you've come into wellbeing, whether it's the benefits route or the medical and occupational health route or the safety route, whichever way it is fine. Now, reach out and make a network and start to work out how you can work with others to embed wellbeing in the entire system, not just in programs that help the system, but in the system itself.
It's very good. Yeah, it's given me an idea actually to help facilitate that network with the future of wellbeing in mind. So thank you for that. What are you working on at the moment? Something exciting you're working on?
Lots of exciting things. As I said at the beginning, opportunities really what makes me smile. We're working on scaling purpose in organizations and finding ways of carrying on that work, and we're doing it in a few organizations. And as you go, you have to work out how to make it work in that organization. I find that really exciting. We're working on deep retreats, particularly aimed at leaders to make some of these shifts, some of those kind of inner attitudes and behaviors, and one for leaders around purpose and really working hard on their own purpose, their own personal mastery, managing that inner world. We're working on retreats about leadership transitions, leaders who are coming into new situations, and how do we support them? I think in working with senior leaders is very leveraged impact. By working with that one individual, you help.
I got it. So you're working with all of that kind of cascading through their responsibilities and their reports for sure. Brilliant. Sounds good. And then finally, kind of recommendations: read, a listen, and a watch.
Wow. So I'm an obsessive book reader. My office is kind of full of books. So my current, triggered by an assignment I had with the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership with one of their clients. It got me going back to Carol Dweck and growth mindset.
Right.
And her book, which is just called Mindset, is so worth reading. It's not new, but going back to it, this concept of growth mindset has been watered down over the years. And people use it all kinds of ways. Companies use it kind of like, we want people with a growth mindset, we want to grow our business. Growth mindset is a really particular thing. It's the belief that your abilities are not fixed, not limited. You can grow your ability. You weren't
Yeah.
born with a certain amount of ability, which is now what you've got. You can grow it, and from that, your optimism rises, your collaboration, your creativity. What a powerful idea!
Yeah.
And so I'm really, I'm finding that it's re-enthusing me.
Fantastic.
A watch. So I'm going to do some old favorites. I've been going back to watching some Brené Brown, and
Yeah.
I use a lot of her material.
Yeah.
And I think she's done us such a favor in the world of getting vulnerability, I don't know, just on the table to be talked about. And in our work on mental health, a lot of that's about encouraging vulnerability.
It is,
Closely linked to psychological safety. So I think, again, people coming back to that again, and what exactly is it? And the relationship to shame, which I think is one of the most difficult human emotions.
Yeah.
And at the heart of a lot of dysfunction in
Yes.
us as individuals and as in systems. So I think that I'm finding that very interesting, and exploring shame and what it is. And that's been a part of my own mental health journey more recently, in the kind of latter stages of dealing with my own post-traumatic stress, has been to look back into some of the reasons why I've felt shame, which has driven some of my unhealthy behavior.
Brilliant. Brene, I think, has done a lot, and she does it with good humor as well, which is why I like to watch her too.
Yeah.
Very good, Tim. Thank you. That was such a beautiful discussion. I really inspired by your thinking. I love having these conversations, and I'm delighted we got to record one of them. Thank you for your perspectives, your wisdom. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Rob, and thank you so much for all that you're doing in helping people to understand their own mental health and to create healthy organizations. You're making a huge impact. And thank you for being open about how you are today. And I'm glad your form scores moved to the green. What comes after green, Rob?
So it goes into the kind of blues, greeny blues through to a very beautiful blue. So for me, my color of mental health is blue, because I often think of blue sky. And when I'm in the darkness, I know that behind those dark clouds, the blue sky still exists. I love that visualization. So we go through the blues.
Well, I wish you much blueness ahead.
Thank you, my friend. Really good to chat.